A calm afternoon in the park turns into a confrontation no one saw coming. Subscribe and comment your city below. The truth speaks louder than force. The late afternoon sun cast long golden rays across the quiet city park, filtering through the thick canopy of old oak and maple trees. The soft hum of life surrounded everything. Laughter from distant playgrounds, the rhythmic chirping of birds, and the occasional thud of a basketball echoing through the open spaces. Joggers passed by on winding gravel paths, dogs tugged at their leashes, and families lounged on blankets. Yet, beneath the wide weathered oak near the northern bench, there was a stillness that set one figure apart. Mike Tyson sat alone on that bench, clad in a simple black tracksuit, his frame broad and unmistakable even with age. He appeared unbothered by the world around him. His gray hoodie was slightly faded, pulled back just enough to reveal a face carved by time and war. Scars, stories, and silence lived in his eyes. His hands, those famous hands, rested on his knees, calloused but calm. His skin, dark and weathered like polished stone, glistened faintly with sweat from a short jog he had finished earlier. He wasn't here for attention. He wasn't here to be noticed. He was here for peace, something harder to find in recent years. Beneath his bench, a small group of pigeons pecked at scattered pieces of a granola bar he had slowly crumbled and tossed. He watched them, his face unreadable, his presence silent. It wasn't the presence of a man trying to disappear. It was the quiet command of someone who had already been everything and now simply wanted to be. But not everyone respected quiet. Officer Daniel Carless, tall, white, and proud in his LAPD uniform, patrolled the park like it belonged to him. The sun gleamed off his mirrored sunglasses. His boots struck the pavement with authority, echoing his confidence with every step. A baton swung lightly at his hip, alongside his service weapon, and a radio clipped tight to his belt. He wasn't patrolling to protect, he was surveying, evaluating, searching for something to assert control over. And when he saw Tyson on the bench, alone, still, and black, his gaze narrowed. Carless disliked what he didn't understand, and he especially disliked black men who didn't look afraid. The old man wasn't smiling, wasn't jogging, wasn't holding hands with grandkids or tossing a ball. He was simply existing. And that alone irritated the officer. "Got ourselves a loiterer," Carless muttered to himself as he changed direction. His boots shifted from the paved path onto the side trail, making his approach deliberate. People nearby glanced his way, but quickly turned their eyes back to their own business. Some knew his reputation: sharp tongue, quicker baton, and a particular contempt for what he called attitude. As he neared the bench, the birds scattered. The crunch of their wings breaking into the air only added to the tension. Tyson didn't move. Not an inch. His posture remained relaxed, but his eyes slowly lifted, settling on the man now casting a shadow over him. Carless grinned without warmth. "Afternoon," he said, his voice flat, already lined with suspicion. "Didn't know we were allowing naps in public spaces now." Tyson's gaze didn't flicker. He said nothing. "Hey," Carless snapped his fingers, "you deaf or just ignoring me?" Tyson blinked once, slow, unbothered. Still no words. Carless tilted his head, the smirk on his face growing sharper. "I said, are you deaf, old man? Or just too high and lazy to move along?" Stillness. A different kind now. The kind that made nearby people slow their steps. Conversations quieted. Even the air seemed heavier. Carless leaned in, lowering his voice to a harsh whisper. "You people love sitting around like you own the place. Just chillin', right? Waiting for trouble to find you." Tyson's jaw tensed for just a moment, but he didn't speak. He didn't flinch. He didn't run. That only fueled the officer's disdain. You think just 'cause you got muscles and a scowl you're above the rules, that you can take up space without earning it? He glanced around theatrically. What's next? Selling weed to the kids in the playground? A woman walking her dog paused 30 feet away, her eyes narrowing in concern. A group of teenagers playing basketball stopped their dribbling. They watched from a distance. Some raised their phones. Tyson slowly turned his head back toward the pigeons. Then, deliberately, without looking up, he placed another piece of granola on the ground. Carly snorted. Cute. Real funny. He stepped closer, the toes of his boots now almost brushing Tyson's foot. You're going to show me ID, and then you're going to move on. Or I'll make you move. No answer. The rage started boiling beneath the surface. Carlis had dealt with disrespect before, but this didn't feel like resistance. It felt like dismissal. And that, to him, was worse. You don't belong here, he hissed, his voice low and racist venom seeping through. This park ain't for washed-up thugs pretending they matter. Tyson looked up, finally. His eyes, brown, aged, fierce, locked onto the officers. And in that moment, Carlis felt something strange. Not fear, not exactly, but a shift, a tightening in his gut. There was something ancient in that gaze, something unshaken. Carlis's hand brushed his baton, not to strike yet, but to threaten. You're going to regret staring at me like that, old man. But Tyson said nothing. He didn't give the officer the satisfaction of anger. His silence wasn't weakness, it was dominance. Carlis didn't see it that way. I asked you nicely. Now I'm telling you, get the hell up. His hand now gripped the baton. The park around them was holding its breath. Phones were recording, bystanders frozen. But none of that mattered to Carlis anymore. Because for him, this wasn't about justice. It was about control. And the man before him, this old black man who dared to sit still, was defying that control without saying a single word. And that was unforgivable. The world slowed as Officer Carlis tightened his grip on the baton. The polished black shaft glinted under the waning sunlight, a weapon that had become second nature in his hand. Around him, the park still hummed with life, but that hum was now muted, overpowered by the tension brewing beneath the old oak tree. Mike Tyson didn't move. His hands rested calmly on his lap, and his eyes were steady, unreadable. He didn't flinch, he didn't plead, he didn't even blink. And that enraged Carlis. Stand up, he barked. The words came out clipped, tight with anger. This ain't a request anymore. Tyson remained seated, unmoved, silent. The pigeons, long gone, had been replaced by the sound of phones quietly recording, of sneakers shifting on gravel as bystanders slowly closed into an invisible perimeter. They knew what was coming. Some had seen it before. Carlis stepped forward and jabbed a finger into Tyson's chest. I don't care who you think you are, he hissed. You think being some old washed-up boxer gives you the right to ignore the law? You think your black ass can sit here like you own the place? Tyson's jaw flexed, but he still said nothing. He simply looked down at the spot where the officer's finger had jabbed him, then raised his gaze again. Calm, unbothered. That was the last straw. With a snarl, Carlis drew his baton with a swift practice movement and swung it down in a tight arc toward Tyson's shoulder. But it never connected. At the very last instant, Tyson leaned slightly to the side. The baton whistled through the air and cracked against the wooden bench with a hollow, splintering crack. The sudden force jarred Carlis's arm, and his eyes widened in shock. He hadn't expected that. Hadn't expected any reaction at all, much less one so precise. Tyson slowly straightened, still seated, still silent. Carlos growled and raised the baton again, this time a backhanded swing toward Tyson's ribs. But again, it was stopped. Not dodged. Caught. Tyson's hand shot up and seized the baton mid-swing. His fingers closed around it like a vice, freezing the weapon in place with terrifying ease. The force of Carlos's motion collided with the immovable grip of a man who had spent a lifetime mastering power. Carlos tried to pull back. Nothing moved. Tyson's grip held firm, still sitting, still composed. Then, with a slow, deliberate twist, Tyson guided the baton downward and released it. The weapon dropped to the pavement with a hollow clatter, rolling once before settling at Carlos's feet. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The teenagers on the basketball court had stopped playing entirely. A woman covered her mouth. Someone whispered, "Did you see that?" Carlos's face flushed red with fury and shame. His wrist ached from the grip. But worse than the pain was the humiliation. He had lost control, in front of everyone, in front of cameras. He glanced around. Dozens of eyes on him, dozens of phones capturing the moment. And Mike Tyson hadn't even stood up. "You think this is funny?" Carlos snapped. "You think you're a damn hero? That your little fans over there are going to save you?" He reached for his service weapon. His hand moved fast. Thumb popped the holster strap, fingers curling around the cold steel grip. He yanked, but again, Tyson moved first. In one smooth motion, he reached out and seized the officer's gun hand. He didn't twist. He didn't strike. He simply held. And the weapon, like the baton before it, slipped from Carlos's grasp. Tyson took it gently, then looked at it with calm curiosity as if evaluating a paperweight rather than a firearm. He didn't point it, didn't threaten. He knelt slowly, placed it beside the baton on the pavement, then returned to his seat. He had still not spoken a word. Carlos's breathing became ragged. Rage boiled in his veins. His humiliation was complete, and the crowd knew it. They whispered, recorded, watched. He was a disgrace, a joke, and Tyson hadn't even raised his voice. But Carlos wasn't done. He couldn't be done. He lunged forward, fist clenched, body tight with rage. No tactics, no protocol, just a raw, desperate charge born of wounded pride, and Tyson met it not with violence, but with simplicity. As Carlos lunged, Tyson turned slightly, let the man's momentum carry forward, then redirected it with one shift of his arm. No punch, no throw, just technique. Smooth, practiced, effortless. Carlos lost balance. His feet lifted from the ground, and then he slammed down on the pavement with a sickening thud flat on his back. The air whooshed from his lungs. His head hit the ground hard enough to blur his vision. The silence afterward was deafening. No one moved. Tyson didn't follow up, didn't even look at him. He simply sat there, hands resting on his knees once again. The crowd stared, shocked, awestruck. Carlos gasped for breath, rage swirling with disbelief. His muscles twitched. His hand reached not for a weapon, but for his radio. He clicked the call button, his voice hoarse and broken. "Officer needs assistance. Repeat. Immediate backup." As the radio crackled, his eyes burned with shame. Around him, people were already uploading the footage. It would go viral. It would be everywhere. But he didn't care. He just needed someone, anyone, to come and help him put this man in chains. To make the humiliation stop. To make him feel powerful again. But deep down, beneath the anger, beneath the bruises, beneath the skin that still tingled from contact with Tyson's calm strength, Carlos knew that power was already gone. The distant sirens grew louder, piercing through the fading summer air like the wail of a warning long overdue. Their rising howl echoed off the trees and buildings, drawing the attention of everyone in the park. What had started as a quiet afternoon now crackled with tension and anticipation. Children were hurried away by anxious parents. Onlookers edged back, uncertain whether to stay or flee. Mike Tyson remained seated beneath the old oak tree. His hands rested on his lap. The same quiet strength he had carried from the beginning still radiated from him. Calm, controlled, unshaken. The baton and the service weapon lay beside him on the pavement, untouched since he had placed them there. He had not spoken a word. He hadn't struck anyone, and yet he had won every moment. Officer Carlos lay a few feet away, pushing himself up with a shaky arm. His face was flushed, his uniform rumpled, his breathing sharp and uneven. The pain in his back was nothing compared to the firestorm of humiliation that burned through his chest. The worst part wasn't the fall. It was the eyes. Dozens of them, watching, judging, recording, and he had no control over any of it. The sirens screeched closer until two black and white patrol cars rolled up onto the grass, their tires digging into the soil. The flashing lights painted the trees in red and blue. Doors flung open. Two officers emerged. The first, young and tense, already had his hand hovering near his firearm. His eyes darted across the scene, taking in Carlos on the ground, the discarded weapons, and the calm, seated man who looked like he belonged in a museum, not in a standoff. The second officer was older, with silver at his temples and heavy lines beneath his eyes. His name tag read Sergeant Matthews. His movements were slower but deliberate. He took in the situation with one long, sweeping glance. Carlos pointed a trembling finger at Tyson, his voice ragged with desperation. "He assaulted me. Took my weapon. That man is dangerous. He attacked a police officer." The younger officer stepped forward, tension in every muscle. "Sir, place your hands where we can see them." Tyson didn't move. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't lower them. He simply turned his head and looked up, first at the young officer, then at Sergeant Matthews. His gaze was clear, steady, and unmoved. Before the younger officer could take another step, Matthews lifted a hand. "Wait." The word came low but firm, cutting through the heat like a blade. The younger man froze. Matthews approached slowly, his eyes scanning everything: the baton, the pistol, the bench, the crowd, and finally, Mike Tyson himself. Recognition flickered in his gaze, but he didn't speak it aloud. Instead, he crouched near the discarded service weapon and picked it up. Then he turned to Carlos. "What exactly happened here?" Carlos scrambled to his feet, voice cracking. "He refused to obey. I told him to move. He resisted. Then he disarmed me. He attacked me." Matthews looked back at Tyson, who remained seated. "Did he strike you?" "He grabbed my baton, took my gun." "Did he strike you?" Carlos hesitated. He threw me to the ground." Matthews' eyes narrowed. He walked over to the younger officer and quietly instructed him to speak with witnesses. The crowd, still lingering, began sharing their footage and recounting what they had seen. Some voices were shaky, others loud with anger. He never touched the cop until he had no choice. Officer came at him first. "That's Mike Tyson, man. He didn't do anything." "Check the video. He stayed seated the whole time." Matthews turned back to Carlos, his tone hardening. "I've got footage, I've got witnesses, and I've got Legend sitting there who didn't move until you forced him to." Carlos's jaw dropped. "You're believing them over me?" Matthews took a slow step forward. "I'm believing the truth." Carlissa's breath hitched. His hand dropped to his belt, but there was no weapon there now, no badge to shield him from consequence. His chest heaved as rage and shame warred inside him. "I did my job," he spat. "No," Matthews said quietly. "You abused it." A long silence followed. Then Matthews' voice dropped, quiet but final. "Give me your badge." Carlissa's eyes widened. "What?" "Your badge," Matthews repeated, "and your sidearm." Carlissa looked around, realizing that everyone was watching. Every witness, every camera, every eye. He clenched his fists. "You can't be serious. He's just another—" Matthews cut him off, this time louder. "Give me your badge." The command echoed across the grass like a gunshot. Carlissa's lips trembled. His pride wanted to scream, to punch, to lash out. But there was nothing left to fight with. Slowly, his hand moved to his chest. He unpinned the silver badge, the one that had meant authority, control, power. It gleamed once in the setting sun, then dropped into Matthews' waiting hand. He handed over his remaining equipment as well, each item a symbol of a power he no longer deserved. Matthews nodded toward the parked car. "You're relieved of duty, effective immediately." Carlis didn't speak. Couldn't. His face burned with defeat as he turned and began walking away, leaving behind the shattered pieces of what he thought he was. Silence followed his retreat. Matthews turned back to Tyson. The heavyweight legend still hadn't moved. The younger officer stepped forward cautiously. "Sir, would you be willing to stay for a statement?" Tyson looked at the man for a moment. Then he glanced at the fallen baton and the gun lying near his feet. He took a breath, deep and slow, then shook his head. "He's had enough," he said. His voice, low and calm, cut through the silence like a bell. The young officer hesitated. Matthews gave a slow nod. "Understood." Tyson rose at last. Even in age, he was formidable. But there was no threat in his movements, only control. His eyes swept the crowd, now quiet, reverent. He turned and walked away. He didn't need to look back. The moment had already ended. As Mike Tyson walked away from the clearing beneath the oak tree, the weight of the moment didn't cling to him. His footsteps were measured, calm, echoing not triumph but a deeper kind of peace. The same breeze that once carried tension now followed him, soft and light, brushing against his gray hoodie as if the park itself were exhaling. Behind him, the scene slowly unraveled. Sergeant Matthews stood silent, Carlissa's badge and weapon in his hand. The silver shield felt cold, heavier than its weight allowed. He looked down at it, not with satisfaction, but with gravity. He had seen plenty in his years, mistakes, confrontations, power misused, but this felt different. This hadn't been a fight, it had been a reckoning. The younger officer remained by his side, still absorbing everything. His eyes darted between the crowd, the empty bench, and the ground where the baton and pistol had rested only minutes before. "You think we'll see him again?" the younger officer asked, voice low. Matthews didn't answer right away. His gaze followed Tyson's retreating figure, cutting a wide silhouette beneath the canopy of trees. Then, almost to himself, he murmured, "We already did." Meanwhile, Tyson continued down the winding path, away from the spectacle, away from the eyes, the cameras, the whispers. The sounds of the park slowly returned. Children's laughter, bicycle bells, dogs barking in the distance. Life resumed, as it always did, indifferent to the weight of justice or the silence of giants. But the ground beneath the old oak tree would remember. It would remember the officer who swung a baton and lost his badge. It would remember the crowd that saw truth without needing to hear it. And it would remember the man who never raised his voice, because he didn't have to. As Tyson neared the edge of the park, a few pigeons fluttered near the path. They had returned to where he'd fed them earlier, pecking at the last crumbs on the pavement, indifferent to what had transpired. He paused, watching them for a moment. Something in their small, repetitive movements felt grounding, timeless. He let a small, fleeting smile touch his lips, not a smile of pride, but of clarity. For years, the world had tried to define him: the brawler, the monster, the champion, the has-been. People had shouted at him, glorified him, feared him, judged him. But today, none of that mattered. Because today, he hadn't needed fists or fame. He had needed only to stand in silence and let the truth speak louder than violence. And it had. He reached the edge of the park. The sun was low, casting long shadows over the sidewalk. A few people passing by looked up from their phones, realizing slowly who he was. Their mouths parted. Some raised their hands, hesitating as if to ask for a photo, but no one approached. There was something sacred about what had just happened, and even strangers seemed to feel it. Tyson didn't stop. He crossed the street and vanished into the city. Behind him, the footage was already spreading online. Clips stitched together from a dozen phones. No flashy edits. No music. Just raw truth. The title varied. Cop attacks the wrong man. Tyson stays silent. Cop gets owned. Justice under the tree. The comments rolled in by the thousands. This is how you handle abuse of power. Mike Tyson is still the baddest man alive. No punches, just presence. That cop didn't just lose a fight. He lost everything. But Tyson wouldn't read the comments. He wouldn't care about the views. He wouldn't do interviews or seek attention. He'd lived through more noise than most men ever would. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to fight. Because some battles are won simply by refusing to surrender your dignity. Back in the park, the old oak stood tall in the fading light. The bench was empty again. The laughter of children rang through the trees. The wind rustled the leaves. Everything had returned to normal, almost, because the earth beneath that tree now held memory. The kind that didn't need video to endure. Power had been exposed, pride had been broken. Justice had spoken, and it had done so in silence. And somewhere in the distance, under a twilight sky, a man walked with nothing in his hands, nothing on his shoulders, and everything in his name. Mike Tyson, a fighter, a survivor, a symbol, not of violence, but of restraint, not of dominance, but of control, not of rage, but of silent, immovable strength. The champion had not come to fight, but he had still won. Sometimes real power needs no words. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe for more.